What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Blood Show podcast. This is your host, Amy Grace, or you can call me AG, just don't call me Amy. And today we're in a little bit of a different space because of the lighting action going on over here. I never film at this time of day, so I never have this problem, but I have this problem today because I'm filming at this time of the day today, because I didn't already say that. Anyways, today we're talking about fear. And so I thought it was only fitting to pull up Americans' top 10 fears. America's, whatever you think is the way to say that. I'm going to go with America's top 10 fears. So we have a lot of blogs saying a lot of different things. So I really tried to find an academic source for you guys because the good collegiate researcher in me was like, yeah, you need to probably find a reliable source before you go and share this on the internet, like you know what you're talking about. Okay, I'm gonna go with the Washington Post. I feel like they're pretty knowledgeable. Okay, top 10 fears. We have public speaking, dun dun dun, shocker. We have heights. We have, I can't see, so I'm gonna hold my phone really close to my face. Please don't make fun of me. Bugs, snakes, and other animals, drowning, blood/needles, claustrophobia, ew, that's me, flying, not me, strangers, yeah, high-key me, zombies, no comment, darkness, that one's kind of fair, clowns, and ghosts. So those are the top 10 fears that we have going on. According to the Washington Post. I'm sure other sources will give you different information. But, I say all that to say, public speaking is the top, one of the top fears for people. And I 100% think it's because of the social aspect of it. I know so many people who deal with social anxiety on all sides of the spectrum. I know people that are super socially anxious and they don't engage much in social interactions because of how anxious they are. And then I know people that are socially anxious but you wouldn't probably be able to tell because they just don't show it. But I think that in this day and age, just with how prevalent anxiety is nowadays, I think that most people at some point in their life have dealt with some sort of social anxiety. It may not be social anxiety disorder, but I'm sure that you've experienced social anxiety at one point or another. And I think that the social fears are one of the biggest problems in my generation. I don't know, I can't really speak for other generations, but I feel like just with how digital we are, we've become so accustomed to being behind a camera or being behind a screen that it's one, we don't know how to do a lot of in-person communication and interaction, and two, we just don't want to do it because we know that we have the option not to. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal testimony with fear and how I've learned to deal with it, how you can learn to deal with it as well. Because fear can be so debilitating and it can feel like there's no way out. It can feel like fear just runs your life. And the truth is, you will own fear or fear will own you. That sounds so corny, but it's true. You have to learn how to deal with your fears. Otherwise, your fears are going to stomp all over you and you're going to be a victim to your fears. And we are not victims because we are more than conquerors in Christ. Romans 8:37 says no. I don't know the context of this, but it says no. In all things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And, I know that they're talking about Jesus in this chapter. But yeah, we're not victims. We're not victims to sin. We're not victims to fear. We are more than conquerors. And I wanted to read Second Timothy, I think it's Second Timothy. Second Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." So we know that fear is not of God. Therefore, it's gotta go. We gotta turn from that. It does not rule our lives. We don't need it in our lives. It's not benefiting us. It's not benefiting our relationship with God. In fact, it's hindering our communion with Him. So let's talk about it. The first time that I experienced social fear, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, I was in 5th grade. So I don't know how old I was. Maybe like 10 or 11. I don't know how old you are in 5th grade. I guess I was like 12 in 6th grade, right? Yeah, something like that. I was in 5th grade, okay? And we were visiting this new church, and we had been in our church for a long time, and so I hadn't really had to like make new friends aside from maybe sports, but I feel like in sports settings it's so much easier because you have a commonality. You both love the sport that you're playing, or you both hate it. One or the other. You're bonding over this sport, and so I feel like it's so much easier to make friends that way. But I was in a church setting with a bunch of kids in like a small group. It wasn't a small group, but it was like the kids church, I guess is what you would call it. If you've been in church, you probably called it kids church. But it's basically just a class of a bunch of other 5th graders or whatever. And I remember walking in and feeling this like sinking feeling in my stomach, and I never really felt that before. And I was nervous. My hands were shaking. Like I was like, I need to get out of here. Like my physical body went into fight or flight, and I was like, not for me. I gotta go. And that was the first time I remember feeling this feeling of like, it felt like everyone was watching me, but looking back on it, I don't think they were. But that's the thing about social anxiety and fear. It's like it blows everything up 10 times bigger than it actually is, and then it gets you stuck in your own head, thinking about yourself, thinking about what you look like, thinking about what you're gonna do wrong, and it's horrible. Like it puts your body into a state of panic. So that was the first time that I had experienced that feeling. And then honestly, I like didn't know what it was at the time, but I never went back to that small group because my parents just didn't like the church. And then honestly, I was never really put in another situation like that. It wasn't until I got into high school that this fear of what other people were thinking about me became like huge and just ran my life. I remember going to church with my best friend because I couldn't drive at the time. I didn't really start going to church consistently until I started driving. And so I would go with my best friend and her family, and so we would go to these youth group services, and that was the first time that I started to notice how fearful I was and how insecure I was. And my entire life, I danced my entire life growing up. And if I'm being honest, I don't mean to sound haughty, but if I'm being honest, I was pretty good at what I did. Obviously, I wasn't the best dancer ever at age 11, so I often received validation and praise in that area of my life. So my whole identity and my whole, like, everything I had my confidence in was dance. Like, dance was my rock. But then when I was put in situations where it didn't matter that I was a good dancer because no one cared, I was like, I don't know who I am. And I legit just didn't know who I was. I was so afraid to make new friends. I was constantly thinking about, what are people talking about? What are people thinking about me? Like, this person's gonna think I'm weird. This person's gonna think I'm not cool. I'm not good enough. Like, all those thoughts just were on, like, repeat in my head. It just became a lifestyle at that point. Like, it wasn't like these thoughts would come into my head and I would recognize the thought. Like, I just lived in it. Like, I was so used to it because that just became the norm for me. This prevented me from making new friends, making connections, truly being myself. Like, I look back on those years in my life and I'm like, how much joy did I miss out on because I was so concerned with myself? Like, I look back on that time in my life and honestly, I see a lot of pride. Like, I don't look back and think, oh, like, I feel so sorry for my younger self. Like, she just didn't know. Like, no, she didn't know, but also she was so concerned with the thoughts and opinions of others. And we know that that's not how God intended for us to live our lives. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality." And so we know that the Bible commands us to work for the approval of God, not for the approval of man. And I lived most of my high school years working for the approval of man, and I regret it. Like, I missed out on so much because I was so concerned with myself, and the truth is, I'm not that important. And I hate to break it to you, but you are not that important either. And I don't say this to condemn you or to make you feel bad, because I want this to be an encouragement to you, and I truly believe that this truth will be an encouragement to you. Because when I finally started to let go of the thoughts and opinions of others, and I truly sought the Lord and did what was pleasing and honoring to Him, even if it made me uncomfortable, even if it made people dislike me, that's when I found true freedom. That's when I knew that I was living a life that actually meant something. And there's so much power and freedom in living for something bigger than yourself, in living for God. Not just anything bigger than yourself, but in living for God. Summer of 2021, I really wanted to go to this dance intensive. And it was in Dallas. It was 4 hours away from where I lived at the time, which I lived in Houston. I grew up in Houston. And I was going to have to go by myself. And listen, as a 16-year-old girl, going off to another city by myself and also having debilitating social anxiety, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But it was I felt like I was supposed to go, but it was so weird because I felt like I was supposed to go, but I also didn't want to go because I didn't want to have to deal with the fact that I was going to have to face a lot of what I was afraid of. And I think that was honestly just the Holy Spirit leading me there, because I kind of just made the decision that, like, you know what, I'm just going to go, and if the worst thing happens, then the worst thing happens, and that's that. What can you do? Whatever. I just was kind of fed up with the fact that I was so debilitated by my fear. Like, I was just over it, and I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but I just kind of threw my hands up and I was like, whatever, if God, if you want me to go, then like, I'm going to trust that you're going to sustain me through this process. Like, you're going to have to help me because I can't do this on my own. I remember literally talking to God and being like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I know that you're good. And you say that you got this, so we'll see about it. And I was very reluctant to go, but I ended up going. And it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. It pushed me out of my comfort zone. It taught me so much about myself and so much of what I was capable of when I was willing to set aside what people thought of me. And that opened the doors for so much opportunity. It's literally insane. I look back on my senior year of high school and I'm like, what in the world happened? Because I was such a shell of myself. Freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, I was sad. I was confused. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to be who I know I was called to be, because all of this fear just felt like it was always caving in on me and there was no way out. But this summer intensive that I went to, it wasn't even necessarily what happened at the summer intensive. It was just the fact that there were so many events that happened that pushed me out of my comfort zone and pushed me to confront my fear instead of avoiding it like I had always done before, that ultimately led to me making a commitment to God. Like, I came back from that experience and I was like, I was just so blown away by what God had done and what he had showed me and what he had revealed about himself to me after that experience, that I was like, I'm all in. Like, I'm tired of this fear thing. Like, I am going to do everything I was afraid to do this year. Like, I'm going to do it. And I'm expectant that, like, you're going to move through this. Like, I was so confident in God, and I knew going into that next year that, like, the fear was still going to be there. And this was probably going to be, like, one of the hardest things ever for me, just because I really did have such, like, extreme social anxiety. But I was like, I'm all in. Like, I'm going to do it afraid. I'm going to do whatever it takes to just do it, because I know that this is what you call me to. Like, I can't hide behind my fear for the rest of my life. Not if I want to live a life that's glorifying to God. I've got to, like, figure this out. And so that's exactly what I did. I did all of the things that I was afraid to do before, and I'd be happy to make another video talking about what that process was like in detail. But I just want you to know that you have got to confront what you're afraid of, because the more you run away from it, the bigger it's gonna grow. Like, I actually did a presentation on fear and overcoming anxiety and all of those things in one of my speech classes, and I did a lot of research for it and came across so many studies that backed up the fact that if you continue to avoid your fear, it actually gets bigger. Like, it actually gets worse. And so while we think that we are soothing ourselves and creating a safe space for ourselves by avoiding all the things that we're afraid of, we're actually making it worse. We are experiencing momentary comfort for long-term consequences. But when we decide to face our fears, we experience momentary discomfort and long-term satisfaction. And so your fear is going to lie to you. Your fear is going to tell you that it's always going to be hard, that you're not good enough, that you can't do whatever it is that you want to do or you feel like you're called to do. But fear is a liar, and you've got to confront the lies face to face. Like, we're done running from it, okay? Because God has so much in store for you. I know that God has a plan for you, because he tells us in his word that he has a plan for every single one of us. And I can guarantee that plan does not involve being afraid of everything. It doesn't. Because like we read in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. And that is not something that you have to muster up on your own. That's something that you get from walking with the Lord, from walking in step with the Spirit, from surrendering your fears, from surrendering your pride and saying, you know what, Lord, I'm going to lay it down. Even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it's scary, because I know that you have something better for me. And I know that because you are the author of life and you are a holy and righteous God, you know better. You know best. You know what's good for me. So we have to crucify that side of ourselves that seeks the comfort, that claims to know that it knows what's best for us. Like, we don't know what's best for us. Only God does. And so I hope that this episode was encouraging to you. I would love to talk more about fear and overcoming it in the future. So if you liked this episode, be sure to let me know. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them for you. Be sure to follow us on all of our social medias. On Instagram, we are at The Blood Show Media, same on TikTok. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, be sure to follow the podcast so that you can keep up whenever we upload new episodes. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe so that you can again be notified when we upload new videos. I post a lot of extra content on the Instagram, so you should definitely go follow us on there. We post some pretty cool stuff. Jesus paid it all. He did the work so that we could walk in freedom, and so we don't need to be afraid of the things of this world because those things don't have power over us. And with that being said, I hope you guys have a fantastic week. I will see you guys next Tuesday at 3 p.m.